You're listening to Cinebinge.
Welcome to Cinebinge. This has been born from my friend's persistence in me watching certain shows.
I've been asking Simon to watch Dark, a German TV show on Netflix, which I guarantee he will like. But for some reason, he's always been a little apprehensive about watching it.
So I said, I'll watch it if we can put a podcast around it. And this is that podcast.
What is the reason? Why have you been putting off watching the show?
You know, for one, it was subtitled, and I don't mind watching films with subtitles because it's like 2 hours and done. But this is a whole series, man. The premise was quite interesting and quite sort of dense. I thought this is going to be like quite hard. Also, it was around the time when I had a lot of other stuff going on. And whenever I watch one of these shows, I can only watch one of these shows. I felt like there was just so much going on. I wouldn't be able to watch anything else without my head exploding. But we've decided that the first podcast, I will be watching Dark. And I'm hopefully, Andrew will be right.
So I'm glad that you mentioned the subtitles, because I was one of the people that was saying that if you are going to watch this show, you do have to watch it with the subtitles, not the dubbed audio, because for me at least, the English audio just doesn't quite hit the same notes as the original German audio. So I'm glad that you're planning to watch this with the subtitles rather than the audio. The reason that I actually started watching Dark in the first place is because people were saying that there were some similarities with Stranger Things. Now, having watched the show, I can see why they may be thinking that, but I actually think that there are more similarities with Lost. Now, the reason I mention Lost is because I know Simon is a massive fan of Lost and has watched it more than once, and may well be the subject of a future Cinebinge season. But for now, we're talking about Dark, and I'm hoping that he will see the same similarities that I have along the way. And if not, we'll talk about them.
Andrew's very good at getting me to do things. He kind of knows how my brain works. And just to give you an example, just before lockdown started, or no, it might have been just after lockdown started, I said, for sort of a joke, I'm going to live stream my reaction to watching the movie Cats, right? And I did this, and Andrew was the first person to come in this live stream, and he said these words. He said, "I bet you don't last 10 minutes, okay? So if anyone challenges me like that, I will have to prove them wrong. It's just in my nature. It's just how I am." So I sat there and I watched it. And as I'm watching this, I thought, I'm not going to look at how long's left. I'm not going to look at the running time. I'm not going to look at like how long's left on the little timer on the bottom. I'm just going to watch it because that way this thing's going to finish. And there's been about 12 songs and I hadn't looked at the clock, hadn't looked at the running time. I thought, this is nearly finished. It has to have nearly been finished. And a few more songs go past. And then I thought, I'm going to have to look at the clock because it's starting to like really get to me. And I looked at the clock and it was about 20 minutes in. And I thought, oh, this is fun. So I carried on watching it, watched the whole thing, it finished. And then at the end of the stream, Andrew comes back into the live stream, right? And he says, "I knew if I told you that you wouldn't watch all of this, you would watch all of this. Ha, ha, ha." So I ended up watching the whole of Cats because he challenged me. So he does know how my mind works. So him saying it is as good as Lost or it's like Lost, to me, that is like, okay, that's a pretty big accusation to make. Now, I've watched the first episode and I can see how the Stranger Things connection is, or a comparison is there, because it does feel very like Stranger Things. The aesthetic to it looks similar to Stranger Things. It certainly doesn't feel like Lost at this moment. I could see how it could be compared to Lost at this very, very early start. It's just asking so many questions. Who's this? Why is that going on? Who's that person? How are they related to this? What's going on there? I think we also need to say from the get-go with this podcast is there will be spoilers for the episode that we're talking about. So if you haven't seen Dark, then just be aware there may be spoilers for this. And the first episode was called Secrets. My take on Secrets was, wow, this is asking a lot for the audience to get on board with. So it threw so much stuff out there. And Andrew will probably laugh at me now because he's obviously seen it. He knows what's coming. But there's like this cave with this hole. There's this guy who like commits suicide at the beginning, writes a letter. I'm like, what the hell is this all about? And then there's this family. There's this affair going on. The one part that sort of has pulled me in to make me go, oh, this is interesting is, from what I can gather, there's this missing child or this missing kid, like teenager. And at the end of the episode, he's like in some brightly coloured room with like some death chair. And he's clearly not being killed, but I mean, if you ask me what's going on, I haven't got a clue. I'm intrigued, Andrew.
And you're right. There are a lot of characters in this show to get your head around, working out who, obviously the different parents and how they connect. I mean, it's not just the children of the parents that we're looking at here. It's how they connect across, places of work, for example. So, for example, you've got the Nielsen's. You've got Ulrich Nielsen, who is a detective in the local police force, and his wife is Katarina, who is the school principal. So you can kind of get the feeling that everyone does kind of know each other in some way. But we're looking at a number of different families. And you've got to kind of get your head, as part of watching this show, you've really got to get your head around all of the different connections, how they connect in terms of families, as well as how they connect in the workplace and in the town, around town. And that's, I think it will take you a few episodes to really sort of cement those relationships in your head. But I, as I've been saying, is don't try to Google your way to understand the relationships, because you will hit spoilers. So definitely avoid that if you can help it.
Yeah, I'm not going to be Googling this at all.
And you're right. The episode, obviously being called Secrets, it opens up with lots of secrets all over the shop. You've got obviously the letter that Michael Carnwell, the guy who committed suicide, the letter that he's written, that is immediately apparent that that's a secret, because his son knows nothing about the letter when he's talking to his psychiatrist.
And he dated that letter so he wrote don't open until November 14th or something.
Yeah.
Before 10:15, right?
Yeah, 10:13.
But it was this year, it was the year that he committed suicide. What was in like June or something? Yeah,
so it's a few months earlier than that. But it's a very specific time, isn't it? 10:13 p.m. on a specific day of the year that year.
Yeah.
There's something, he knows something, but what it is he knows, we don't know.
And this letter that he wrote, towards the end of the episode, some older lady opens it, and obviously the TV show doesn't tell you what's in the letter, because why would they do that? And she just looks very upset about it. There was this old guy, and he was saying, it's starting again, which starts to make me think there's going to be some sort of time travel cycle going on, and potentially the beginning of this show, I think we might see again in later episodes. But it's also got an interesting soundtrack. The soundtrack sounds like the Joker soundtrack, and I'm just wondering if it's the same composer.
I'd have to Google that and find out.
I'm scared to Google anything on this show.
Well, this is why. I mean, I'll do the Googling for you, and then I can report back my findings afterwards. When I was watching this episode for the first time, I kind of felt like it was kind of in the way that they were talking about sort of the older generation. You have the adults and then the younger children. I got a sense that perhaps, yes, you're right, it could be time travel, but another potential explanation for this is that the adults just know something happened 33 years ago, and whatever happened back then is going to happen again. And I'm kind of drifting into the size.
Whoa. Hang on. 33 years ago. Where's the relevance from that?
Right. Well, I'll come to that. Right. So 33 years ago, it's mentioned a couple of times in the show in this episode. So 33 years ago, Ulrich's brother disappeared.
Is Ulrich not Daniel Craig?
Ulrich is Daniel Craig. Yes, I get what you're referring to there.
He looked very like Daniel Craig.
Yes. So when he was younger, as a kid, his younger brother disappeared, and that's what his mum. When he goes to visit his mum in this episode, she starts talking about how seeing things in the forest and so on, and they have a little brief discussion about his younger brother disappearing 33 years ago. I can't remember the exact words she uses, but she basically refers to something happening back then, but we don't know what happened back then. You know, why the brother disappeared. The other mention of 33 actually in this episode is when the power plant boss speaks about how he arrived in the town 33 years ago. And again, you're kind of going, okay, is that connected? You know, immediately you kind of, this episode is basically setting up lots of potential villains here and kind of going, oh yeah, they know more than they're letting on.
Okay.
And it kind of makes me think, you know, there's a lot of potential people here that they're immediately dropping in. So obviously, Helga, the old guy that was in the care home, repeating, you know, it's happening again. I kind of got the feeling at that point that, as I was going to say earlier, I kind of got the feeling that yes, time travel is one potential answer to this, but it may also be something like It, where the evil spirit would come round in a cycle and would come back. And so maybe something that happened back then is going to happen again now. And it's not time travel related at all. It's actually just the thing that happened back then that some other adults are aware of because they lived through it the first time. Maybe they kept a pact between them, and it's now happening again 33 years later, but with their kids this time. You know, it's that was my immediate kind of takeaway from this episode, was that it was setting that kind of situation up. Another example of where that might have happened is in, was it Nightmare on Elm Street, when the parents of the kids were involved in a pact to get rid of Freddy Krueger.
Yes.
They burned him alive. And they were keeping the secret about what had happened back then, but then it started impacting on the kids. So again, I was kind of going down that line at this point going, yeah, that would be a plausible explanation as to why we're seeing what we're seeing. We just don't know what happened back then, and we don't know what's happening now.
It was only an hour long, the episode. It is difficult when you're watching a show or a film with subtitles because, you know, when it first starts, your eyes do that thing. You go, what am I doing? Am I reading or am I watching the film? And you don't want to be like missing points. Whoever did the subtitles for Dark, I mean, they must think people can just read extremely quickly. And when you're trying to read something and trying to take it in and it's going off, that becomes frustrating. What you would recommend not watching it with the dubbed accents.
Yeah, I just when I tried to listen with the English accents, I just felt like the tone of their voices were too happy. Maybe, I don't know. They just didn't seem to get the sense of foreboding and something bad is going to happen. You know, given the show is called Dark, you kind of wanted that sense that, I mean, what worse way could you open a TV show than with a suicide, in terms of, you could immediately go, oh, okay, this is dark. You know, when we start talking about the similarities to other TV shows, Stranger Things, I get that, given that you've got a bunch of kids running around potentially being impacted by something, and they're going to presumably solve the mystery of this, that's where the similarities with Stranger Things would probably come into play. But like, even in this episode, the immediate kind of one that jumps out really early on, like the very first, I think it's the very first scene, scene that you see at the beginning of this episode is a shot of the bunker. You see like a bunker doors, and obviously in Lost you've got the hatch, and so that's kind of the very first kind of thing that I think of when I compare the two shows.
It's also the opening of it. There seems to be a lot of mirrored imagery in the title sequence, and I think that's got something to do with it. And also the guy who kills himself at the beginning, I don't think he's dead. I think he was doing that to go somewhere else, maybe. I don't fully know, but it was almost in a way like And if you've not seen Lost, then there's going to be lots of comparisons to Lost because this show is supposed to be like Lost. But how Desmond could go to places, and I got that sort of vibe from that guy. But then also, towards the end of this episode, I think he appeared in like a scary sort of dark demon-y type way. So well, maybe it's not quite like that then. It does very well at setting things up and asking questions, but it's not like just put it on and eat popcorn and, just let it fly over you. It's not that type of show at all. You have to sit and like dissect everything that's going on the screen, which I love that type of show. But at the same time, it was difficult to like jump into.
Yeah, I would agree that this is a show that you've really got to pay attention to, particularly with episodes like this, where there's a lot of exposition, where you've really got to pay attention to what's going on with the characters, with the backstory that they're talking about. Like, for example, the younger brother disappearing 33 years ago. There's a lot to take in around each character. And so you can't just have this on in the background while you're, doing something else and then glancing up occasionally to see what's happening on screen. It would not... You would not catch half the things that are going on in this.
And it takes a brave move. It introduces so many new characters like straight away. And not many shows like they do that. They would maybe spend an episode where they introduce the main characters and then the following episode you'll be with a load of other new characters and then they build it up. Whereas this show, it just feels like they just throw them all in at the beginning and like, you just got to get on board with this and we're not going to dumb this show down, and it's up to you to pay attention.
Yeah, and that definitely follows through for the rest of the series. There's a lot it was not so much about characters, like dropping new characters every single episode, but I'm just thinking in terms of how it expects you to. It touches on a lot of themes. There's a lot of classic literature and science quotes and so on that are dropped into this show throughout the show. There's certain principles that will keep repeating, certain themes that will keep repeating. You may not always catch them first time around, and obviously I'm watching this for say the third time now, and I'm still catching stuff in this episode that I didn't catch the first and second time around. So yeah, it's worth persevering with, but you do have to keep your wits about you while you're watching it and really pay attention to the details.
What advice would you give to me then while I'm watching this show to get the most out of it? Don't Google.
Don't Google. Whatever you do, don't Google. Even if it means having to rewatch an episode and map out who is who until you're clear who is who. And if you don't know who someone is, then just put a question mark down against them. Not every person in this episode got given a name. Not every person in this episode was given a relationship with other people in this episode. So I'm pretty sure it won't give anything major away if I say, for example, that the power plant owner is actually the husband of Regina Tiedemann, the hotel owner. So, Bartos, the friend who is going out with Marta?
Yeah.
Right, so he is their son. And the relationship between Regina Tiedemann and...
Do we know
Bartos,
that at this point?
You don't. You only know that Regina is Bartos' mum at the very end of this episode.
Right.
And...
Yeah, so anything like that's happened or anything information you find out afterwards, I do not want to know that until... And this is the thing, right? This is how nerdy Andrew is about this show. He was going to do me like a diagram of all the families and how they all interconnect and stuff and who they are. I was like, dude, don't send me that, because if I've got to feel like I've got to have a diagram next to me as I'm watching the show, I'm just not going to be able to watch that show. It's better for me just to watch it. And in fairness, it was like that with Stranger Things, which was a fairly simple show to watch. But when it first started and no one knew anything about it, having to learn who those characters were and how they related, the best thing about any TV show that's made well is that you learn that yourself, every show. House of Cards was another show where that took a long time for me to get into because it was so complex with the different politics that was going on and the different, it used terminology that just isn't, used every day and is certainly I'm not used to. but once you got used to it and then you grasped it, it was great. So I think it'll be the same with this show. I was tempted though to wait for the American remake of Dark.
I don't think you should. I don't think it would. Again, it comes down to tone. I just don't think an American version would get it right. Going right back to the beginning of this episode was called Secrets. And I mean, we've only really touched on a handful of the secrets that are in this episode. So as we sort of spoke about the letter, presumably a suicide note, but we don't know for sure. Something is obviously in that letter that upset the old lady.
I didn't think it was a suicide note.
No. So what happened with the relationship there? Because clearly there's a breakdown between Hannah, the mum of Jonas, and the old lady, because the photo of the family together had the old lady ripped out of the photo. So in the very early part of the sequence, you see the photo in its full glory with everyone in the photo. So presumably the old lady is part of her extended family. And in fact, later on in this episode, Hannah gives the old lady a call and talks about the power to the home, and talks about her grandson being Jonas. So that old lady is actually Michael Carnwald's mother.
Do we know that?
Yes, in this episode, the fact that Hannah calls her, leaves a voice message on her phone saying, the power's out, if you really want us out of the house, what would Michael think? Or I forget what else she says, but and specifically mentions Jonas. You haven't spoken to him for ages and so on. So although it's not explicitly stated, it's quite clear that it's Michael's mother or somebody connected to Michael. That's why she's ended up with the letter. How she got the letter, who knows? Because who even stumbled upon the death scene? Who discovered Michael Carnwald? There's a whole bunch of questions around how she ended up with that letter, because Jonas doesn't know anything about it.
Is Jonas the kid in the yellow jacket?
Yes.
That's his dad who committed suicide.
He knows that it was his dad that committed suicide, but he doesn't know why he committed suicide.
Right.
Because when he's walking to presumably school and he's talking to Peter Doppler, his psychiatrist, and he mentions two of the things that he mentions is, I keep seeing my dad. And Peter says, what, in your dreams? And he leaves it open-ended. He doesn't say where he sees his dad. He just says he keeps seeing his dad. Now, is that like visions during the daytime? Is that why he's on medication? But he then says, or the psychiatrist then says to him, what is it? Why do you think you keep seeing him? Is it something that he needs, you want him to say to you, or do you want to say something to your dad? And then he goes off on a bit of a rant and says, why did he do it? Why did he kill himself? Why like that? And so on. So clearly he doesn't know. Either there was a suicide note that he's never seen, or there was no suicide note at all. We don't know. We presume that letter that the mother has, or the presumably Michael's mother, is a suicide note. But perhaps there's something in there that talks about why he did it. We don't know.
There's a little boy who goes missing, and this is where there's another similarity to Stranger Things, because that shows about a kid that goes missing. But when they find the body, they say this isn't the kid, and it didn't really allude to why. I thought, well, that body isn't a human. It looks like a clothes that are being stuffed or something like that. It certainly didn't look like a real human being or something. So, but I think as the show goes, it's going to reveal stuff slowly. I'm hoping it ties it all together. So I'm just looking forward to get to the point when I get used to the characters and how they work and what the relationships are.
So as I said earlier, they're setting up lots of potential people involved in the disappearances of both Eric Oberman, the gingerhead kid who disappears, even before the show starts, and then maybe something related to the current disappearance of Mikkel, who's now disappeared.
They're definitely connected. I also got a vibe of Twin Peaks with this show. Did you ever watch Twin Peaks?
No, but that may well be the subject of a future Cinebinge.
Yeah, that's a really, really good show. We might have to do that as a future Cinebinge.
So having watched the first episode, what did you like about this episode?
I liked the cinematography and how it looked. I liked how the mood it was building. There was this sort of sense of dread as the show was going on, which sounds a bit mad to say, I enjoyed the sense of dread, but I just like what it's doing. It's very different to anything that I've watched at the moment. Obviously, I can't say I love the show at the moment because I've only seen the first episode, but I enjoyed it more than I expected to, and I am looking forward to see where it goes. I just hope it's not like when whatever is revealed, I don't go, oh, because I hate that. Or if I can, what I like about it is like my favorite type of movies are films that you watch, and while you're watching them, you go, what the hell is going on? I know this is great what I'm watching, but I don't have a clue about what it is. Stuff like The Matrix. When The Matrix first came out, it's like, what is The Matrix?
And Memento as well.
Yeah, and you're watching it going, what is this about? Like, or Inception or something like that. And then it isn't till literally the end you go, wow. And then it makes you go, I've got to watch that again because I love that. So that's what I'm hoping that this show will do.
I think you will succeed. I think you will get that out of this show because, as I've said previously, the reason I wanted you to watch this was I had watched through the first and second season of this show, then ended up going back to watch season 1 again, and then season 2 again before I then watched season 3. And now I'm back on my third playthrough of this. And I really do think that it is the type of show where each time you watch it, you will just find something new to obsess over and go, oh my God, that's amazing. I didn't realize that little detail. But is there anything you didn't really, is there anything that would have put you off immediately if it wasn't for me pushing you and saying, no, stick with this?
I did try and watch it months ago when you told me to, and I think I watched like the first half hour, and there was just far too much stuff, and it felt like very complicated, and the subtitles it did put me off, but I'm just going to persevere with that. But I think the subtitles, they do disappear when you get engrossed in it, and I was sort of engrossed with it. I'd say it's not a show to watch late because if you're not off, if you miss 10 minutes of the show, then you'll have to go back and watch the whole thing. Like, well, that's kind of what my what my initial feeling is on it. But I'm looking forward to watch episode 2.
I would like to tell you a little bit of trivia around this episode, or something that was mentioned in this episode. So when Ulrich visited his mum and they were talking about the disappearance of the brother many, many years ago, and she starts talking about obviously seeing somebody in the woods, in the forest, and so on. And she mentions how she had found a chocolate bar wrapper in the woods, and that it was Mads, the brother's favourite chocolate bar. The name, exactly. So the name of that particular chocolate bar was called Raider in most of Europe at that time, and changed its name to Twix to meet the to match up with the international name. So I didn't actually discover that until more recently, and that was yet another sort of indication of, it wasn't just, oh yeah, that's a chocolate bar, that's still in existence. It was a chocolate bar that only existed way back then. So the fact that it's now suddenly turned up in the middle of a forest is quite interesting, I think, in terms of, why has it only just been discovered? Or is she just making it all up? Did she actually show that wrapper?
So now I am thinking this is about time travel.
Well, did she show the wrapper? Did she mention that she saw somebody in the forest? Is she seeing things, or did she actually see stuff in the forest? There's a lot of questions there. And then obviously at the end, when Ulrich looks at the child and says that it's not his son, I think perhaps, I don't know what made him think that, but certainly what was interesting was his face around his eyes appeared to be burned in some way, disfigured. So that's probably why you thought it didn't look human. It seemed to be a child of some sort, but with their face just sort of mutilated in some way. Next to him, I don't know if you caught it, but next to him was a little Walkman tape player.
Right. No, I didn't see that.
Yeah. So everything about the setup for that that child there. That, I think that's probably, you wondered why he didn't think it was his son. I think there was enough clues there that he basically went, no, you know, he's not wearing the same stuff. He's not wearing the same shoes that he knew that he would be wearing. And there was enough about it that he went, no, this isn't my son. So there's a lot of questions that are coming out of this first episode. And so the question for you is, what question do you most want answered in the next episode?
I think the one question that I've got at the moment is, what did that letter say? That's what I really want to know. I've got a feeling if this is anything like a typical mystery type show, I'm not going to find that out in the next episode. I'm probably just going to get lots more questions in the next episode.
And now we go on to episode 2 and find out.
If you enjoyed this episode of Cinebinge, make sure you subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.